Hi everyone, my name is Angela Hagfelt and this is my research presentation for political psychology and public opinion. And the topic I chose was terrorist acts against art, antiquities, and heritage sites. Kind of just an overview of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to try and define terrorism and talk about why and how terrorist groups form, the political psychology behind terrorist acts against art, antiquities, and heritage sites, which is also known as cultural property. Is cultural property always destroyed, or is it sold to fund terrorist operations? I'm going to talk about resolution strategies, international policies to help protect art, antiquities, and heritage sites, and government policies of the United States that are in place for the protection of cultural property. So what is terrorism? And there's not a universal definition for terrorism, but there's some commonly accepted definitions. And some of those are, it's a form of covert political violence. It challenges existing norms of the targeted governing society. It's deliberate and systematic violence meant to hurt. It's symbolic and political resistance to authority. It's meant to disrupt society and cause chaos, and instill fear and panic and create an opportunity for terrorists to seize power. How or why do terrorist groups form? Terrorist groups have an imperialistic image, which means they believe they're superior in culture and capability. And another reason they form is they come together because of a common ideology. Members can join because of thrills and status, love, identity issues, personal grievances, the lure of adventure, the primary human need for survival, and for connection and comradeship. Within the terrorist group, there are high levels of trust between the members. And some groups are formed from legitimate pre-existing groups, such as groups that exist in churches or schools. Terrorist groups go in there and recruit members from pre-existing groups. So the political psychology behind terrorist acts against art, antiquities, and heritage sites. The first thing is they're trying to destroy the foundations of a society by attacking their cultural heritage. They want to take advantage of a government's weakness to protect its people. They're trying to generate publicity through, they record these acts and then use them as propaganda. They like social media a lot. They put videos on social media. They use them to self-represent, and they're trying to impress prospective recruits. Another reason for the political psychology behind these acts is it's a form of social control, a tactic of social control and dominance. And they believe that by destroying works of art, antiquities, and heritage sites, that they're overriding and replacing place-based memories of a community, and they're trying to replace them with their own ideologies and perceptions. So I have some examples of cultural property that's been destroyed, and that terrorists destroyed it to demonstrate dominance and generate publicity. The Bamyan Buddhas were in Afghanistan, and they were in the Bamyan Valley for 1,500 plus years, and they were blew up with dynamite because they didn't comply with the terrorist group's ideology. The Temple of Hatshepsut was targeted, and the group was targeting the tourist industry, and so they picked this place because it magnified the propaganda of their attack by doing it in this ancient temple. Askar River Shrine is one of the holiest sites in Shiite Islam, and it was destroyed because of what it stood for. Timbuktu was an outstanding universal heritage site, and it was destroyed mostly to establish a terrorist group's identity. And Palmyra was considered the cultural epicenter of the ancient world, and it was destroyed because it was deemed idolatrous, polytheistic, and blasphemous. And a lot of social media was done during this attack, and so they were able to reach a huge audience, showing them destroying the sacred cultural epicenter. And most of these places have tried to rebuild. You can see in the picture of the Askar River Shrine that they're trying to rebuild, and I know Timbuktu and Palmyra, they've tried to rebuild some of the buildings that were destroyed. The Temple of Hatshepsut wasn't like completely destroyed, it was just shot up like with bullets while they were targeting tourists. And then the Bamyan Buddhas, they wanted to rebuild them, but because of the level of destruction, one of the Buddhas was just like dust, like they can't, there's no way they can rebuild. So do terrorists always destroy art, antiquities, and heritage sites, or do they try to sell cultural property to fund their acts and operations? And that is basically what they do. They illicitly sell and smuggle antiquities and artifacts to generate a large sum of money. And when they move into a area, they take control of heritage sites, museums, private collections, and archaeological sites, and then they loot them, and then they sell them on the sell any type of artifact they can sell on the black market. They have members of their group who are in charge of managing the flow of antiquities to the black market, and they have been known to employ experts to make fake relics. And it's a big issue of supply and demand. If there wasn't such a demand for these artifacts from collectors and museums, then they wouldn't be able to sell them to fund their operations. But it's kind of a catch-22 because museums and collectors would rather buy them illicitly than see them destroyed. So they buy them even though they know they're helping fund terrorist operations. So I don't know. I guess you just have to decide the lesser of two evils. Either be destroyed or I don't know. It's a hard one. So some resolution strategies that can be used to help curb the destruction and or the illicit sales of art, antiquities, and heritage sites. One would be to reduce stereotypes and encourage equality, because terrorist groups have the imperialistic image. Reducing stereotypes and helping everyone to see that they're equal could help. Perspective taking on the perspective of the targeted group and having empathy maybe can help. One thing I read said that a lot of terrorist threats are empty threats, and they're just trying to get attention. And once people give them the attention they're after, they keep doing it until they eventually destroy the area. And so realizing that they're empty threats might be a way to resolve it. There is a working group on preventing and resolving conflict within the Middle East, and they address economic and political issues, enhance legal and international instruments, improve cooperation of law enforcement, and they're trying to counter terrorist group financing through their financing through the illicit sales. There's also the option of making an international military and civilian cultural emergency response team. And this would rely on cultural property protection lists, which are lists that countries or nations or communities make that show what cultural property lies within their boundaries, and that would help to protect it during conflict. It would also help to make tactical and strategic operations, and cooperation is the key point of this working, like leaders, government officials, military, police, citizens, they all have to cooperate and work together in order to protect their cultural heritage. So some of the international policies in place to protect works of art, antiquities, and heritage sites. The first one is the Lieber Code. And the Lieber Code was created in 1863 by Francis Lieber, and it calls for the protection of religious and educational structures as well as museums of fine art and science during conflicts. And then in 1899 and 1907, the Hague Conventions and Regulations were held to codify rules of conduct on the conduct of warfare, and they based their principles off of the Lieber Code. And these were the rules and kind of the code of conduct during both World Wars. And then after World War II, when there was such an immense level of destruction of cultural heritage, the 1954 Hague Convention was developed, and it's the 1954 Hague Convention on the Protection of Cultural Property During Armed Conflict. And this is probably one of the most known policies in place. And it set forth the principle that damages done to cultural property belonging to any group of people means damage to the cultural heritage of all mankind. And it called for the protection of cultural heritage and it 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 put forth the principle that acts of hostility against another group or state's cultural property must be avoided except when it's militarily necessary. And then in 1970, the UNESCO Convention on the Means of Prohibiting and Preventing the Illicit Import, Export, and Transfer of Ownership of Cultural Property. This was created because there was an increase in looting. So they developed this convention which opposed the illegal trade of artworks, antiquities, and any artifacts. Protocols 1 and 2 were added to the Geneva Convention in 1977, and these provisions relate specifically to the protection of cultural property, and they prohibited attacks against cultural property. The Second Hague Protocol was adopted in 1999 to clarify some of the provisions that were detailed in the 1954 Hague Convention, and it narrows the definition of military necessity. And then in 1999, there was also the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court added to the 1954 Hague Convention, and this classified that any intentional destruction against cultural heritage would be considered a war crime. So when terrorists destroy cultural heritage, they're actually committing war crimes. And then the last one I have is Resolution 2347, which was adopted by the UN in 2017. And it formally recognized that the defense of cultural property is imperative for worldwide security. So I have this little video here. See if I can get it to work.
These images, seen around the world in 2015, reportedly filmed by members of the so-called Islamic State, show men damaging...
Sorry, my internet's kind of glitchy. Hopefully it keeps going. Give it a second.
and destroying ancient cultural artifacts in the city of Mosul in Iraq. Some of the works were thousands of years old. There's a growing trade in looted cultural artifacts from sites in Iraq, Syria and other parts of the world, with items ending up in auction rooms and private collections thousands of miles away. At the Council of Europe, talks are underway to try to protect cultural property and stop the illicit trafficking in cultural goods.
The new things now is that we criminalize all those who are taking part in this illicit trade, be it the smugglers, the dealers, the buyers, the fixers, all those who are involved in this. And of course this will help our member states to cooperate because they have a common standard and the courts have a common standard to make judgments in these cases. So it will be a very important new step in combating this illicit trade.
It's linked to the ethnic cleansing of regions in the Middle East, and therefore the international community could not stand by and watch this happening without taking measures, in particular measures having to do with the fact that there would be no looters without buyers.
We know that Council of Europe is legally, really the legal space of European law and with so many important conventions. So we have accompanied this work from the very beginning, apart from having close cooperation. And I'm confident that we should not only respect our mandates. Of course, we are a global organization, UNESCO, a global agency of the United Nations, but we should make sure that these conventions are really implemented, ratified, implemented, and see some very practical results of our work in synergy.
The Council of Europe saw and heard firsthand the scale of the problem from the head of museums in Syria.
Before the occupation of the ISIS in the first times, we transported the good party of the statues, about 400 statues, beautiful statues to Damascus, and many hundreds of small artifacts. After the liberation also, we evacuated about the totality of the National Museum of Palmyra, all object, what damaged or not damaged. We reopened all the safe places and we transported all things to Damascus. Now it is under risk. I am sure we will receive new bad image about the destruction of new building in Palmyra.
The Council of Europe also heard from the International Criminal Court prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda. This man, Ahmad Al-Faki Al-Mahdi, pleaded guilty and was given a 9-year prison sentence for destroying 9 mausoleums and a mosque in Timbuktu in Mali.
This is a very clear message that the International Criminal Court is sending, that these are very serious crimes. Destruction of these buildings are very serious. Targeting these buildings, which are not military targets, but buildings, as I said, that are dedicated to religion and culture and history, is a war crime, and that they will not go unpunished.
It's hoped that a new Council of Europe convention aimed at protecting cultural property and preventing the illicit trafficking in cultural goods will be open for signature by the middle of 2017.
Okay, so back up here. So what is the United States government's stance or policy for the protection of art, antiquities, and heritage sites during conflict? They actually helped draft the 1954 Hague Convention, but the executive power did not sign it because they were worried, they had concerns about how it would affect policy and military operations during the Cold War, so they didn't sign it when it was first drafted. It went before the Senate in 2008, and they voted to ratify it. And so it was ratified in 2008, and then they presented it to UNESCO. And yeah, they presented it to UNESCO in March 2009. And so the United States became the 123rd country to sign the 1954 Convention. And the military has adopted the principles in the 1954 Hague Convention, which some of this stuff they were doing before they ratified it, but they've made like a better effort to comply with the principles during their military training exercises to teach soldiers how to protect cultural property. And they realized that protecting cultural property not only saves important history, but it also wins the hearts and minds of occupied populations. And the United States also has a cultural antiquities task force, which releases a list of antiquities that are at risk of being illicitly sold on the black market. And they give this list to like custom agents and international police and domestic police and anyone that would come in contact with artifacts being sold on the black market. And it just kind of makes them aware of what is out there and what to look for. All right, so that's my presentation. In conclusion, art, antiquities, and heritage sites are important not only to local communities but also to the world. And terrorist groups use the destruction of cultural property as a political strategy and to attract attention and to strike at the heart of targeted communities. Through illicit sales of artifacts, they fund their terrorist operations, and this allows them to continually look for new targets and to recruit new group members. And it's important to humanity to make an international and a domestic effort to try and resolve these conflicts or to develop protection policies to protect cultural property from terrorist attacks. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.